Before we start this video, I gotta quickly thank all of you bros again. You guys are giga jazz, every single one of you. Yesterday was a week since I started uploading videos, and I thank you for reaching 1000 subscribers, and now we're already at almost 2K. Thank you so much, and enjoying the video. Previously, we got to see Mr. Lin opening a bookstore underground and getting a couple of visitors. Miss G, Old Wild, and Joseph, all of them confusing Mr. Lin and thinking he's some kind of a being with indescribable power, and all of them came for advice. Miss G is trying to defeat Helix and taking advice from Mr. Lin, and Joseph is hunting down Old Wild, and thus he finds himself in front of Mr. Lin's bookstore in the last episode. Now we get to see Radiant Knight Joseph in front of the bookstore, having a magical aura around him to protect him from the rain at all time. That's how powerful he is. He then thinks to himself that he doesn't understand why would a powerful black mage like Old Wild decide to spend an hour in this ordinary bookstore. But Joseph says that he can't let this opportunity go to waste and decides to go in to investigate. As he's entering the bookstore, he is thinking to himself that as a knight, it is his duty to protect law and peace. Now we see our main protagonist, Mr. Lin, just sitting in a chair in a bookstore browsing through books, and there is one book that he's holding in his hand, The Little Prince, and he thinks about how this book is a children's book, but it has so many philosophical points and it's both heartwarming and cute. He decides to read this book tonight before going to sleep, and at that moment the doorbell rings and somebody enters the bookstore. Mr. Lin gets excited that he gets a new customer, and then he thinks that Miss G is probably his lucky charm because every time she came to visit him, as soon as she left, some other customer came in. Now we see the imposing presence of Radiant Knight Joseph, and Mr. Lin also realizes quickly that this man has a threatening presence, but being a good book clerk as he is, he welcomes him and offers him his services. Radiant Knight Joseph is scanning the area with his magical eye, but he realizes this is just an ordinary bookstore and that Mr. Lin is just an ordinary man, and doesn't understand why Old Wild would spend any time here. But then Joseph sees the gargoyle and thinks to himself that this gargoyle is the only out of the ordinary thing in this entire bookstore. He thinks that Old Wild wouldn't just give this gargoyle to anybody, and he decides to investigate a little bit further. Then he asks Mr. Lin if he's the actual owner of the bookstore, and before replying, Mr. Lin thinks to himself that this guy seems a little bit unsociable, so he decides to use an endearing and respectful language, and decides to call Radiant Knight Joseph Grandpa. When Mr. Lin says, "You're right, I'm the owner of the bookstore, Grandpa," Radiant Knight Joseph gets surprised, shocked, and completely angry. Even though Mr. Lin was trying to be polite, Joseph took this in a wrong way and took it as an insult, thinking to himself that he should bash Mr. Lin's skull in, but he won't do it since Mr. Lin is just an ordinary man and he can't go around bashing skulls of civilians. He then asks Mr. Lin if this gargoyle is his actually, which Mr. Lin says yes, a customer gifted it to me, and that's the reason why it's not on sale. Joseph thinks to himself that he would never want to buy something like this. What the hell would a Radiant Knight do with a gargoyle made by a black mage? Then Joseph asks Mr. Lin if Old Wild gifted this gargoyle to him. Mr. Lin answers yes, but thinks to himself that this man might have a grudge against Old Wild because of his threatening demeanor. Joseph is still a little bit confused and doesn't understand why would a powerful black mage gift a gargoyle this powerful to an ordinary man. Joseph says to himself that first he thought this is a gathering place for black mages, but after scouting it, he knows that this is just an ordinary bookstore with an ordinary book clerk. But maybe they're using this place to exchange secret messages is what Joseph thinks. So this place would be an exchanging point for the black mages then. Now we see Mr. Lin thinking and trying to analyze and understand what kind of a man Joseph is. He thinks to himself that even though Joseph has this threatening aura around him, he must be a good man and a gentle soul because he didn't break anything after he entered in the bookstore. And if he is a gentle soul, he shouldn't have a grudge against a literary student like Old Wild. Then Mr. Lin remembers a quote from Sherlock Holmes, which goes, "If you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." And he realizes, yes, and asks Joseph, "Are you a friend of Old Wild?" Joseph gets completely surprised, but he decides to use this for his advantage, saying that yes, he's known him for many years and that they've shed blood together in war, but that they've had a small conflict 2 years ago and he didn't hear about him since then. And while Joseph is thinking to himself that as soon as he sees Old Wild, he's going to rip his head off and break his bones, and that's basically what he already did last time they fought, but Old Wild used some unfamiliar magic to escape death and run away. So while he's thinking this, Mr. Lin is thinking that they really have a deep connection and a bromance and an enviable friendship. And he tells Joseph that he realized they are close friends because Joseph immediately knew that Gargoyle was from Old Wild. Joseph said that he's been looking for Old Wild all these years and asks Mr. Lin if he has the address of where Old Wild is right now, that he would like to pay him a visit right now personally. Mr. Lin says that he would gladly give him the address, but unfortunately that he doesn't have it. But he lets Joseph know that Old Wild borrowed the book and he will be back in a couple of days to return the book. And when he comes back, Mr. Lin will tell him about Joseph trying to find him. Then he asks Joseph if he would like to sit and rest for a while, and his business instincts are kicking in, and he asks him if he would like to borrow a book. Joseph sighs and says, "Do I look tired?" And he thinks to himself that even though Mr. Lin is an ordinary man talking to a super powerful man right now, he's still being really casual and friendly towards Joseph. And Joseph thinks to himself that nobody talked to him like this for many, many years, ever since he became a Radiant Knight. Then Joseph says that he isn't tired, but he has no reason to pass on a little bit of tea. But he will not read any books, since he doesn't like reading and he didn't bring any money with him. Mr. Lin thinks to himself that Joseph is incredibly arrogant judging by the tone of his voice, but that he is opening up right now. So he offers him with tea and tells him that he can read any book behind him for free. Joseph again refuses to read the book and thinks that his headache is getting worse and worse. And in that moment, Mr. Lin just slides a book to Joseph. Book's title is A Seed of the Abyss. And then also tells him that he's reading a fairy tale right now that's really relaxing and soothing for soul before going to sleep. And if Joseph wants, he can let him this book to read to help him relax his soul. Joseph scoffs and says, "Fairy tale? Young man, you're an adult as well. Why would you read such a book? That's so immature." Mr. Lin is a little bit disappointed because of how condescending Joseph is and tells him, "Suit yourself, but this book is really good. It's the only copy in Nokken region." Joseph gets surprised and asks Mr. Lin, "What? Are you certain this book is a fairy tale?" Mr. Lin, left a little bit confused, says, "Yes, this is the classical story. Is there any problems?" Joseph thinks to himself that nobody in his right mind would call a book which name is A Seed of the Abyss a fairy tale story for kids that you read before going to sleep. Now we get to learn something new and mind-blowing twist. Books that Mr. Lin has and sees, when he gives them to his customers, they see it differently, and the book changes in according to what the customer's soul needs. That's why Joseph was surprised, because Mr. Lin was talking about a fairy tale, but the book's name was A Seed of the Abyss. But Mr. Lin saw this book as the story of Little Prince, which in reality is a children's book. Now Joseph gets intrigued, and because of this, he asks Mr. Lin to have a look at the book, but not because he's interested in it, but because he is a polite person who doesn't want to decline such a polite offer from Mr. Lin, who keeps recommending him to read this book. Mr. Lin thinks to himself that this grandpa is really like a macho man on the outside, but he's really soft and has a woman's heart on the inside. And as he offers Joseph the book, and as soon Joseph touches the book, he feels a familiar feeling of dizziness and pain. He realizes it's the sword Candela, resonating with something right now. Is it the book, he wonders? He's completely confused, and while falling down to the floor, he remembers Mr. Lin saying bedtime. Is this what he meant? We can see Joseph fighting to stay conscious, but he faints and falls on the floor. Mr. Lin, completely shocked, screams, "Grandpa, are you okay? What is happening?" And as he's running towards Joseph to give him first aid, he's thinking maybe he had a stroke. And after checking his pulse, he realizes that Joseph's breathing and heartbeat are completely perfect, and he's just sleeping. He's a little bit confused, but he says that Joseph has a better pulse than Mr. Lin in his prime, even though Mr. Lin is young and Joseph is so old. But then Mr. Lin gets scared a little bit again, thinking, but why did he pass out? Why did he fall asleep so suddenly? Is it something to do with the book? No, it makes no sense. Why would anybody pass out after seeing the Little Prince title? However, Mr. Lin collects himself and says, "He is my customer right now. He passed out at the bookstore. I need to take care of him, make him more comfortable right now, and I'll ask him about it when he wakes up." Now we see Mr. Lin trying to lift Joseph up and carry him to a more comfortable place, but literally after using all of his power, he can't move Joseph not even an inch. After getting completely tired, he thinks how Joseph is very heavy, and he's got muscles everywhere like a big brown bear. He thinks it would be much easier to carry Joseph if he was as thin as Old Wild. Then Mr. Lin thinks maybe another customer will come and help me carry him. But there's no way anybody will come at this time of night and at this bad of a weather. Then he apologizes to Joseph, saying, I'm sorry for doing something like this, but I can't do anything else. It's out of my power. And because he can't carry Joseph, he starts dragging him by his coat on the floor to find a more comfortable place for him. After placing him on a comfortable chair, he notices that Joseph has a mechanical arm, and he thinks maybe Joseph is a cripple like Old Wild. But then he sees how complex and intricate this mechanical arm is, and Mr. Lin thinks to himself that there's no way an ordinary old man would carry something like this on him. Then Mr. Lin thinks that Joseph is maybe a high-ranked retired military officer because of his attitude, the way he looks, the way he acts, the way he talks, because he is so muscular for an old man. Yes, that's it, Mr. Lin thinks, because he already met retired military officers in the past, and all of them have the same exact aura around them. Mr. Lin also thinks that he has to have PTSD because of his guarded attitude, and that he also must see his lost arm as a glorious reminder of the battle he once fought. These kind of elderly people are always so stubborn. No wonder he seemed so arrogant before. Then Mr. Lin thinks that maybe Joseph's mechanical arm malfunctioned. He got some kind of an electrical shock from it, and that's why he fainted and fell asleep. Then Mr. Lin thinks to himself that if somebody saw what just happened between him and Joseph, they would probably think of Mr. Lin as a serial killer who just murdered somebody and took him in the back of the shop to hide the body. No, there's no way somebody would think something like that, Mr. Lin thinks. I'm an upstanding citizen, and even though this scene is easy to misunderstand, there's nobody here to see. But then we see a cat peeking through the door, and then runs away. Mr. Lin hears that somebody entered the store, but this was cat living, but he didn't know that, so he goes to check and he sees an open door. After going outside to see what's going on, he sees this cat running away. He tells the cat, watch out, it's dangerous because of the weather outside. He thinks this is a regular cat, but we can see Cat actually being frightened and having actual thoughts, thinking how could this happen. Then after getting tired and running a little bit further away, we can see Cat actually speaking, saying dispel shape-shifting, and it starts transforming into a man. We learn that this man is a spy working for Secret Instrument Tower, and when we see his face, he's crying, thinking how could this happen. Then we get to learn more about this man, and we realize he's Joseph's biggest fan, and he studied and worked very hard to join his order as a spy. And because he studied so much, of course he knows everything about Radiant Knights, their battles with enemies, and the battle between Joseph and Old Wild as well. After learning that Joseph is going to the bookstore to find out why Old Wild was there, this man decided to shapeshift into a cat and follow him to protect him if he needs assistance. But after realizing this is just an ordinary bookstore, he waited outside to get autograph from Joseph after he's done. But because Joseph took so long, he peeked in to see what's going on and what is taking Joseph so long. And when he peeked, it was at the exact moment that Joseph started fainting. Then the cat started thinking how powerful Mr. Lin is, because he could overpower and beat Joseph so easily. After going back to see why did he drag him back, he saw when Mr. Lin told Joseph, even a veteran like you deserves to have some sleep dreams. The cat misunderstood the situation and felt ominous aura coming from Mr. Lin, thinking he was casting some black evil spell on Joseph while Joseph was sleeping. Then the cat gets scared, realizes that if Mr. Lin is so powerful that he could defeat Joseph, he's probably going to finish the cat as well. He gets so scared and starts running away, saying, I have to get out of here as quickly as I can. I'm so scared. Sounding as he is about to poop his pants. Now we see the man shaking and quivering in fear outside on the rain, thinking, wow, this is how it feels to look death in the eyes. And he thinks that if Mr. Lin wanted, he could have finished him off, but for some reason he let him go. Why, he wonders. Does he want me to go back and report? We get to learn the name of this man, whose name is Morrison Gregg, and he decides that he has no other choice, that he has to go back and report this current situation. Then we see Mr. Joseph waking up and finding himself in the deep water again. What? Where am I? He thinks. Oh, another curse of Candela, another illusion, he thinks. But why don't I feel pain now? He then hears a voice. When you gaze into the abyss also gazes into you and recognizes one of its own. The voice was coming from the book, and the words from the book were overflowing Joseph's mind. Stop! Stop! It's too much! He yells. Then he hears another voice that says, I'm happy to finally meet you. Joseph starts to feel pain fading away, and he realizes that curse of Candela is finally lifted. When he looks towards the illusion of Candela, he sees a beautiful blonde-haired knight, the first owner of the sword, and the curse was now gone. "This is that kind of a fairy tale?" Joseph tells in his sleep, and as he wakes up and snaps back to reality, he yells, "Fairy tales are definitely for kids." While Joseph is still a little bit confused, and while waking up, we see Mr. Lin turning around and saying, "Oh, Grandpa, you're finally awake." And instead of getting completely angry like he usually would, Joseph puts on a slight smile, looks at Mr. Lin and says, "Thank you." Mr. Lin says, "No problem. How do you feel? Do you feel alright?" Joseph thinks for a moment and says, "I feel great. Better than before." Then Mr. Lin thinks that with Joseph's physique, there's no way he's anything else besides a retired military officer. He then realizes that his skills at judging people are becoming more and more accurate, and he thinks how Joseph is so strong, he could probably take someone's life with a single punch. He thinks if Joseph was to punch Old Wild, he would send his upper half of the body flying away. But thankfully they're friends. Joseph then apologizes to Mr. Lin for accepting his hospitality and then causing inconvenience for him. But Mr. Lin says, "No problem, my job is to help the customers. This is what I also told Old Wild." Joseph says, "I see, I understand," and thinks to himself that Mr. Lin, with his carefree attitude, will help all of his customers, no matter what affiliation they belong to. The moment you enter the bookstore, you become his customer and he will take the best care of you. And Joseph thinks to himself that he only saw this kindness and pure heart in one group before, among the elves. Ancient and long-lived race. It would make sense if Mr. Lin was also an elf himself. It's because he has lived a very long life that he has left the differences between good and evil. Everybody is the same and he's trying to help everybody. He treats people with warm and polite attitude, and this elegance can only be achieved after years and years of refinement. And he probably opened this bookstore because of the knowledge he possesses. Joseph then remembers that Candela was the prince of the ancient elven kingdom, who later became the moon king of the elves as well. But he was also the first to lose his mind. He finished his own life with his own sword, and the sword sealed his soul away. And that's how Curse of Candela was born, making the future wielders of the blade go crazy with hallucinations and eventually lose their mind and end their life as well. And before today, Joseph also thought that there's no way for him to avoid this curse, but this book helped seal this curse of Sword of Candela. He then realizes that only an elf could possess such a book, and no ordinary elf at that. This elf must have lived for thousands and thousands of years. And this elf probably used immense magical power to preserve this book in a perfect state. And that's why Mr. Lin probably doesn't have any magic aura around him. Yes, it all makes sense now, Joseph thinks. He then asks Mr. Lin, can he borrow the book since this was the only copy? Mr. Lin, happy to see that Joseph got interested, says, "Of course, I wouldn't recommend it if you couldn't borrow it." And again, he turns his business mode on, and he wants to give validation to Joseph because that's what everybody likes to get. And then he tells Joseph, "From the moment I saw you, I knew this book was perfect for you. There's a lot of people like you who suffer great pain because of the turmoil and regret boiling within them. Makes them feel as if their strength was inadequate, which makes them doubt themselves, which eventually leads them to madness." Mr. Lin tells Joseph. Mr. Lin then thinks that people who saw Battlefield firsthand can never easily forget it, and they always carry those awful memories with them for the rest of their lives. He then tells Joseph that in the end, it's not the pain that defeats these kind of people, but their weakening kindness. Joseph then thinks to himself that he already saw two previous wielders actually succumb to this feeling of inadequacy, and asks Mr. Lin, "Is it wrong to be kind?" Mr. Lin says kindness is not a problem. Weakening kindness is a problem. Because they have high expectations of themselves, they think of themselves as having big responsibility to other people, which in reality is their weakness. With that sort of weakening kindness, they can save others, but never themselves. And as soon as their spirit grows weak, they will become susceptible to everything. He tells Joseph it's okay to not always be the invincible hero. It sometimes takes more bravery and courage to be a normal man. And Mr. Lin thinks to himself that this is a great business strategy that almost made him tear up, that he sure is going to reach Joseph as well. Joseph finally understands and thinks to himself that it's not the curse that drives people insane and make them end their own lives. It's the pursuit of the perfection they chase. And he thinks, why did nobody ever notice this before and tell me? He then asks Mr. Lin, how long will I remain calm like this? And Mr. Lin thinks to himself that it's not going to last long because it's just a children's book. If they had a permanent effect, then there would be no need for psychiatrists. He then tells Joseph that it's not going to last long, but if Joseph allows Mr. Lin to help him, Mr. Lin guarantees a long-term result. Now what Mr. Lin is thinking, that this way he will gain a recurring customer, but Joseph gets completely surprised, thinking that Mr. Lin is actually asking to take the curse of Candela upon himself. Then Joseph thinks that people might say that he's already been wielding the sword for the longest, that he's already wallowing in his own failures before the sword even got the chance to corrupt him, that the invincible sacred flame used to sound intimidating before, but now it doesn't anymore. Joseph thinks that it was a good thing that he decided to retire. Maybe all of this happened just so the sword could find its next rightful owner. Are you certain? Won't it cause you inconvenience? It's not a simple matter after all, Joseph tells Mr. Lin, while thinking that Mr. Lin wants to take Sword of Candela under his own and wield the Curse of Candela, while Mr. Lin was thinking about consulting Joseph in the future and giving him more books. Yet another funny misunderstanding. Mr. Lin thinks of himself as a professional life coach, and since there was a misunderstanding between the two, he tells Joseph that there is nothing to worry about. You're barely holding on right now, correct? If you want, I can gift you this book. Joseph gets surprised, doesn't know what to say, and Mr. Lin continues speaking, saying, you've been carrying those burdens for far too long. You and your heroic comrades deserve to rest. Joseph is left in complete awe and admiration of Mr. Lin's selflessness, elegance, and grace. He thinks that only people who lived very long lives could achieve such level of these attributes. Joseph is happy and he answers saying that there is no need to rest right now. He will rest when there is peace in the world. And as he's leaving, he asks if he can borrow this book. Mr. Lin says no problem at all. Just register your details here to borrow the book, and thinks to himself, yes, I've gained a new customer. Joseph fills in his details, bows down in gratitude and leaves the bookstore, saying that he has no more regrets and the only thing left for him is to serve justice. It doesn't matter if Wilde survived or not, because sooner or later, when Joseph gets his hands on Wilde, he will end him once and for all. Now as the chapter draws to an end, we can see old Wilde in his chambers studying the book that Mr. Lin gave him, saying that the knowledge in this book is as vast as sky and as deep as the ocean. He is feeling an overwhelming euphoria as he's learning about secret sacrificial rituals from this book. It's a wild ceremony and a grotesque task. Then old Wilde turns around, looks at his black mask and thinks to himself that maybe it's time for the black-scaled faces to reappear in Nokin once again. He feels a hypnotizing greatness of emotions and says to himself, this is only possible thanks to Mr. Lin. I've prepared a special gift for him. I'm sure he will like it. If you want to find out what happens next, be sure to subscribe with bell notifications turned on so you don't miss out when the video goes live, when part 5 goes live. It should be out in a couple of days, so once again, don't forget to subscribe with bell notifications on. Thank you so much for watching the video again, guys. Yesterday we were at 1,000 subscribers after only a week of uploading, and now today we're already almost at 2,000. I can't believe what's going on. Thank you bro so much. I really appreciate it. Have a great day and peace.